Welcome to the Andrew Holland Podcast, where we talk about business, entrepreneurship, and everything in between. Now, here's your host, Andrew Holland.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Andrew Holland Podcast, where we talk about business, entrepreneurship, and everything in between. I'm your host, Andrew Holland. As a business owner and an entrepreneur who has started and sold multiple companies, as well as being a CPA in the corporate world, I started this podcast to be the ultimate support group for business owners and entrepreneurs, no matter where you are in your journey. So whether you're just starting or thinking about being an entrepreneur, or you've been in business for a long time, this podcast is intended to be your weekly go-to source for inspiration, guidance, and valuable insights. Together, whether through interviews with other entrepreneurs and business owners or relevant business leaders, monologues, or other formats that we explore throughout this podcast, we have fun with it. We look at the stories of successful entrepreneurs. We dive deep into different practical business strategies. Sometimes we talk about the economy. Sometimes we talk about various things happening in politics that have large impacts on small and medium businesses. And we discuss everything in between so that we can learn, understand, and together be successful in the business world. Because the ultimate truth is that none of us are alone. And in year 2 or 3 of the first real business venture that I had, the garbage company I've talked about, I felt very alone. And nobody ever needs to feel that way. So please help me grow our support group by following and liking us on your favorite podcast outlets, whether it's Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube Podcasts. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, the Andrew Holland Podcast, so you get the updates every week when we post the video version of the podcast. And lastly, follow me on Twitter and Threads. My handle is A Holland Podcast. That's A Holland Podcast. There, throughout the week, outside of the podcast, we talk about topics that we may have discussed with entrepreneurs that week in the podcast. We also talk about other relevant business conversations that are going on throughout the middle of the week. And of course, be sure and listen or watch every week and share with all your friends, your family, your colleagues. Remember, we often talk about financial and legal concepts on the podcast. Don't take anything you hear on this podcast or any other podcast for that matter as the absolute gospel truth. Make sure you're always consulting the appropriate professionals in your area to get the best advice for your unique situations. This week, we have a real treat with Ben Garland as our entrepreneurial guest. And Ben is somewhat of an adventurous risk taker, at least his hobbies indicate as such. And he's currently the owner of an explosively growing medical company called On-Site Medical. And Ben will describe to us in detail exactly what the nature of that company is and how he founded the company. Whether it's insurance, whether it's in the mortgage business, and now in the medical industry, Ben has garnered a tremendous amount of wisdom and excellent advice that he gives us this week, and I think you'll really enjoy it. Ben, thank you so much for joining the Andrew Holland Podcast, and welcome.
Of course. Thanks for having me today, Andrew.
So you and I have talked a lot, and you have one of the most naturally gifted entrepreneurship minds just because you've experienced so much. So we've got a lot to cover, but I want to hear your story from the beginning. Everybody that listens says, okay, how did this person get to where they are? Why are they so entrepreneurial? So tell us, where did you grow up? Were your parents entrepreneurial? That's a very common thread between a lot of the people I interview is someone in their family at some point helped them discover, you know what, I like that. I want to be an entrepreneur. I want to run my own business. And other people just stumble into it. So give us your background.
Yeah, so I did not have a entrepreneur in my family per se. My parents both spent their lives in corporate America. They actually met at IBM, so they both worked at IBM. My mom later left and went for Hughes, later become Raytheon. My dad was in data storage at IBM. My mom was in executive consulting, so like life coaching basically, but within an organization.
Sure.
So they were always hardworking, and they worked 40, 50 plus hours a week for, all the way up until we were in high school, but always for someone else.
Where were we born and raised?
Born in California. So they were working at IBM in California, and then IBM built a new branch in Tucson, Arizona. It's where they put all their data storage technology at the time, and it's called the Rita Ranch plant. So my dad got relocated for that. So we moved to Tucson when I was 2, grew up in Tucson, ultimately went to the U of A. After graduating from the U of A in Tucson, moved up to Phoenix to continue the business we had down there at the time up here, because I wanted to go to a bigger city, but we can get into that later. But it's as far as I could go that made sense for the business.
Yep. University of Arizona.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. So I did have a role model, I guess you could say, that kind of showed me the entrepreneurial example at a young age. So my parents had a couple other couples they were really close with, and one of those couples was a couple by the name of Steve and Kathy Griffin. And Steve was a hustler. I mean, always a hustler. He wore his hat backwards, which royally pissed my dad off because he never wanted me to wear my hat backwards. Whenever I was with Steve, he'd turn my hat around or whatever. And he was like the cool, not uncle, but the cool quasi uncle that I always wanted to hang out with and whatnot. So Steve would always tell me about like what projects he was working on or what he was doing. He actually had a cell phone business for a long time called the Cell Phone Guys. It was like a hustle to sell cell phone and cell phone plans.
What year is this, plus or minus?
I'm in middle school at this time, probably very young, kind of just getting to know Steve through family. We're hanging out at Thanksgiving, right? And my parents' chili party and things like this.
So mid 90s?
I would say late 90s. I was born in 87.
Okay.
So, I graduated high school 06.
Okay.
So it's probably late 90s into the early 2000s. And so as I was getting into high school, Steve had moved into the mortgage business. He had sold his phone business. He was now in the mortgage business, kind of in that beginning of the heyday of mortgages. And he got busy fast. And he needed people to help him. So he said, well, why don't you come in and help me? And so I was just going to go in there and process paper or whatever after school when I was probably a freshman or sophomore in high school.
Okay, so this is in college. Or high school, rather. Sorry.
Yeah. And this was my first time like in an office. I mean, I always had something I was doing. I was always selling magazines to somebody or, doing something because my parents wouldn't give me enough allowance. So I just go and find a way to make it. But ultimately, Steve had me in his office to do help with the mortgage game. And I was probably coming up on like my 16th birthday, and I realized that I could probably sell the mortgage. At the time, you didn't need a license to sell a mortgage. Post great financial crisis, you did. But at the time, you didn't.
Yeah.
And so I started selling mortgages in high school for Steve, and we were doing like countrywide refis to people in double wide trailers in like Southern Arizona. And the numbers didn't really make sense, but they were printing the money and we were following the rules. And so that was kind of my first exposure to like, okay, if you can gain an understanding of something, if you can become proficient in it, you can reach people and you can solve an issue for them or fill a need, they'll buy something from you.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of where I got my first big affirmation that this sort of, hustle and gritty attitude that I always had as a kid could actually maybe translate into a career that might work.
Any siblings?
I do have a sibling, yeah.
Okay.
So my younger sister's 4 years younger than me. We are similar in a lot of ways and polar opposites in others. She's a physician's assistant.
Okay.
She's crushing it. I keep trying to convince her to come work with me in the medical world or do maybe a medical project together, and she's just not having it. So I'm not selling that well enough. But Shelly's awesome. She's actually just about to get married. She's getting married in my backyard, so we're getting ready for that project.
That's why you're doing the project.
That's why we're doing the remodel project.
Ben and I were talking before this. He's redoing the whole landscaping in his backyard.
Yeah.
So
I keep reaffirming to my wife that I'm not doing it because of the wedding, and I'm doing it for personal reasons, so hopefully she never sees this podcast. But
well, if she does, she'll be happy that the backyard looks the way it does anyways.
We'll see.
Okay, so you get your first experience with Steve. Was that your first experience understanding not only the business side of things and how to get customers, the operations, but finances?
I don't think I really understood finances. I still don't understand finances sometimes, but I don't think I understood finances till much later on. I mean, the two qualities that backing up from like business experience, although my dad and mom were not business people, I think one of the key traits that gets me as far as I can go or as far as I do go in the business world is the grit, right? And it's this ability to take on extraordinary challenges and push through and stick with them. And we can talk more about some of that as the podcast goes on. But I really, if you've read the book Grit, it really resonates with me.
I was going to bring that up. It's an awesome book.
Yeah, and Andrew knows me. I tend to do crazy endeavors, right? Whether it's run across the Grand Canyon 2 times or ride my bike hundreds of miles through the mountains of France. Like I fueled by taking on extraordinary challenges. And so I got that grit from my dad. My dad, one of the people always ask me, like, what was the moment where you realized that you kind of had this character trait? And I don't know the exact moment. There was like, if I wanted $20 in my family, my dad would say, you move that 20-ton pile of rocks to the other side of the yard. And if I want another $20, he'd say, okay, just move it back to the other side. And I could move it as many times as I wanted. He'd keep giving me $20. But it was through his lessons that, this sort of character trait came out, or became obvious to me. And the turning point for me where I realized I might be a little bit different in that category, it's kind of a funny story. I bought my first car from my dad. It was a 1990 Toyota 4Runner. It was like $1,200 or something. And right before my 15th birthday, it probably had about 150,000 or almost 200,000 miles on it at the time. 3 or 4 days after I bought it from him, I was trying to show off to my girlfriend. I sank the car in a river and filled it up with water. The car is destroyed. So I slid a note under his door and I said, Dad, when you wake up in the morning, we need to talk. So he wakes me up at like 6 in the morning.
You weren't hurt?
No, we were fine. Okay. We got out of there, and that's another story, but we survived. So ultimately.
Was your girlfriend impressed?
I don't know. It's hard to say. She's not my wife, so
I was gonna how long did it last?
Yeah, so it wasn't that impressive. But ultimately, my dad wakes me up in the morning, 6 a.m. He goes, "What's up?" And I'm like, "Hey, the car is at the bottom of the river. We got to go get it." He's like, "Well, what do you mean?" I tell him the story. So he's not thrilled, but we go down there. Sure enough, there the car is, full of water. We winch it out of there. We pull it up. It looks like a submarine coming out of the ocean. There's weeds hanging off of it, and water's pouring out the doors. Ultimately, long story short, we take it to our favorite mechanic. They're like, "This car's totaled. You need a new car. It's not even worth it." So my dad says, "Look, you can buy a new car with the money that you don't have, or you can fix this car. And if you fix this car, I'll pay for all the parts. But I'm going to buy you a manual on how to do it, and I don't want you to bother me for help unless there's a bolt that's too tight." So, young, egotistical 16-year-old, I'm like, "Yeah, this will take me, 2 months max." So he gives me half the garage. He gets me the manual, and I start tearing this thing apart. It took me 2 years before I turned it on. And you're in high school at the time, right? You're 16. You're supposed to have the cool car, the cool girl, whatever. And I had none of it because I was in the garage. And I'd come home every day after school and work till 12 o'clock at night, 1 in the morning, as much as I could. Get up early, start again. Actually went through the whole process, put the whole car back together. I forgot to put the throw-out bearing on the clutch, which is what disengages the transmission so the vehicle can start.
Was this a manual? It
was a manual.
Okay.
So the vehicle didn't work. So then I had to tear it all apart again because that's like the very bottom of the vehicle. And it took me a solid 2 years. And when we turned the thing on, it never really worked right. You kind of had to kick the dashboard and punch the steering wheel and then turn the key. But, this was an extraordinary undertaking. At the time, it seemed normal to me. At the time, I didn't even think about it. It was almost fun. It was a hobby, right? It was something that consumed me. Looking back, even when I tell the story, I'm just like, man, it's insane that my dad would even give me half the garage for that long, but it's just also an insane thing to do. It was one of the major turning points in my life. And it gave me an extraordinary level of confidence in myself of you can learn something, you can master something, you can complete something. And no matter how tough it gets, you keep pushing through it. And so spending time with Steve allowed me to apply some of those skills in the world of business. Yeah. Spending time with the athletic people that I hang out with allows me to apply some of those skills in sport. But it's those skills that I got from my dad in moments like the car story that I think actually allow me to move forward with intention and effectively in whatever my endeavor may be, business or otherwise.
I love how you said your parents themselves may not have been entrepreneurs and they worked in corporate America, but based on what you just told me, it's very likely you maybe wouldn't have discovered that trait had your dad not made you work. Number one, he taught you work ethic. A lot of people just give their kids stuff.
Totally.
You wanted money? Okay, you do this, regardless of whether the task was menial or not. He just taught you.
Well, he was a craftsman. He still is a craftsman. My dad,
like a woodworker, or what's
anything.
Okay.
Whether you give my dad a task, and he believes that he can learn it and do it better than most people that he would pay to do it. It was always something new. His mind is like my mind. I think sometimes he can get bored with things that he's sort of somewhat mastered. We're both kind of jack of all trades, master of none, but it's the learning of the new thing that's really exciting. So, whether it was, he basically rebuilt our house by hand, right? Then he took on, woodworking. Then at one point we inherited a bunch of guns from my grandfather. So he took on gunsmithing. And then, the list just goes on and on and on. Motor vehicles, later now in life, he's mastered photography, an incredible landscape photographer. So, he kind of showed me that, you have the ability to do something probably better than most if you take a level of passion and care to it and you give yourself time and be patient. And so I live to work in some ways. I enjoy work. My dad was not that way. I think he did early on, but ultimately he worked to live. And
was that because he was working for corporate America, working for someone else?
I think so.
Yeah.
I think so. I mean, that might be another podcast with him, but I think, my understanding in talking to him was that when he started with IBM, he was a blue blood, right? Blue suit, blue tie, white shirt. You ate, slept, and breathed IBM, and you believed in IBM. You believed in what it was about. It was changing the world. It was this time when tech was just exploding very early on, and you were legitimately working on machines that were changing the world. I think he felt in the latter half of his career that IBM became a big corporate behemoth and didn't respect the people the way that it used to. He felt detached. And I think like anything, great sports players or whatever, when you're a part of something and then later you feel distant from whatever that something is, it's hard to continue to be there and be present.
Culture, what you just described, and we talk about that so much on this podcast, is culture.
The culture shifted.
Yeah, we talked about it. We just did a podcast episode on Good to Great, Jim Collins' book. You and I were talking about it. One of the most meaningful differences for all of the companies, and actually IBM was talked about in that book, but I've heard the culture, as we've moved into the 21st century, has become less inviting. And if someone from IBM wants to come on and tell us otherwise, you're more than welcome. But
yeah, I need a waiver here that I'm not liable for it. When watching it happen, how they changed when my dad was working there kind of speaks to that, right? At the beginning, it was this camaraderie. You're in the office together. You're in the trenches together. You're working together. Then someone comes in and says, hey, we're going to save a bunch of money by sending everybody to work from home. So now all staff will get a stipend to go work from home. You're going to have the time of your life. You're going to be super happy, and off you go, right?
And that happened pre-COVID.
Oh,
right?
this was in the late 90s, early 2000s. But it's funny, my dad would say every time they would get a new leadership team, if they were in the office, the new people would say, hey, we're going to save money by sending people home. Then the next person would come in and say, hey, we need to boost productivity, so we're going to bring everybody back. And then 3 years later, they're sending everyone home again. So it's been interesting watching us go through this process in COVID. Yeah. And now post-COVID, seeing how the big companies are reacting. And in COVID, you had so many people saying, oh, we're going to do this forever. This is a game changer. But I think for a lot of your large enterprises, this whole work from home concept has been an ebb and flow over years.
Oh, it's shifting dramatically. Now you have multiple, Jamie Dimon today issued a warning. If you're not coming back to work, find another place to work, because they recognize what you talked about. How can you build a culture when everybody isn't together? They're not in the same location.
So I think that was his thing, is he fell out of the culture and he just got his passions elsewhere, and I respect him for that. And I'm learning now, I guess in what you would call the middle of my career, that I love building things, but it's, again, going back to me, my motivation is not, like I spend a lot of time trying to find my why, right? And what really drives me. And it is, it's this the learning curve of something new and the mastery of something new is what really gets me out of bed in the morning. Mm-hmm. And then doing something with that, overcoming or taking on a great challenge with that new skill in hopes of maybe inspiring others to action, that is really my why. And ultimately trying to develop a life that I can be proud of.
Sure.
I call it living proud. And I'm realizing now in this part of my career that, with business, I'm pretty confident at this point that I can build a business, right? I could slave away tirelessly for the next 100 years to become as rich as possible, or start to find more balance. And these are daily decisions that I have to make. But I'm seeing that my passion is more about the learning. And as I've started to have a pretty solid understanding of business, my mind wants to turn to other things, which means less time in the office. And so I'm realizing that my dad and I, what drives us and what our passions are, they really are quite similar. I think I just applied mine to work, to entrepreneurship. But last thing I'll say on this is, looking at my dad's career and timeline, it was right around probably age 40 that he started to detach in a noticeable way to me from his job and focus more on other things. And I'm 36. I'm going to be 36 in December. I'm still rocking and rolling at work, but I'm looking at the trend line. I'm going, well, when I'm 40, I might be, my passions might be split up a little bit more. So we'll see what happens.
It's interesting. So many concepts that you talked about. Number one, honing your gut and trusting your gut. And that only comes with experience. We'll get there. We haven't talked about how did you get into, you were in the insurance industry, and now you're in on-site medical, providing medical care for large companies. You go to them and you take care of their workforce. Back up. Go to college, tell us how you moved into insurance and how your life matriculated to where it is today.
Yeah, absolutely. First thing I'll say is early on, going back to the story with Steve. So Steve had the mortgage business. I was in there hustling, selling mortgages and whatnot. He wanted to become the full service real estate shop, like most people at the time, right? Real estate, title, insurance. So I said, okay, senior year or junior year, whatever it was of high school, I'll go get my insurance license. And I'll be the insurance guy. So I went and got my license. I went and worked at Allstate for a summer. This is before I was 18.
Okay.
And then I came back to work with Steve. And now I'm going into college. I was going to be a finance major. I guess an important part of this story is going into college, I kind of detached from Steve and I wanted to do my own thing for the first time, but I need to pay for school. And so I started a business called Lux Living because in the mortgage crisis, obviously, a lot of houses were underwater. So next to the University of Arizona, there was a really nice neighborhood called El Encanto and a couple other ones, Colonial Solana, where there was really high value homes that were all underwater. But there were 5, 6, 7, 8 bedroom homes, villas, mansions, very nice. So we started leasing them to students. So we would take over the property management or ownership of the home. We charged $1,000 to $1,200 per room, per person per month. And then we'd lease the house out for $6,000, $7,000, $8,000, $9,000, well exceeding the mortgage and turn it around so the owner could hold on to it. Mm-hmm. And so we had a couple of mortgage customers who needed this, which is how that idea was born. And I said, okay, I'm going to run with this because I had a lot of friends in college that could afford it. And so I basically became the landlord. And so that was called Lux Living. I did that for up until junior year.
So you didn't own any of the properties. You were really managing them for...
It was 85% property management. We had 2 that we owned.
Okay.
And, but coming into my junior year of college, I was like, I knew I wanted to leave Tucson. I wanted to go check out other things. And this property management business was very Tucson oriented. And it was really cool when I was leasing homes to my friends because I'd go over there I'd lease them the house. Then Monday through Thursday, I'd be over there like cleaning the pool and managing the property or whatever. Friday, I'd be shaking them down for rent. And Saturday, we'd be drinking beers together in the backyard. And then, come Monday morning, they're throwing the beer cans at me to go pick it all up or whatever. And so it was an interesting thing. But later on, I started leasing to other people that I didn't know. So when I'm coming into my junior year, I'm now working with freshmen and it's people I don't know. So I wasn't emotionally connected anymore. And so it didn't drive me as much. And I graduated college 2010. So now the economy is starting to turn back the other way. And some of these owners are like, hey, maybe I don't want to lease my super nice mansion to a bunch of kids anymore. So between the writing on the wall there and my own interests, I said I ought to go do some internship work or something to bolster my finance resume. I was finance entrepreneurship.
I was going to ask you, what was your major in college?
So I'm thinking, okay, I'm going to get a job at Wells Fargo or go to Wall Street or whatever I'm going to do. So I called Steve and said, hey, why don't I come back and we'll do the insurance thing? And he, at that time, really was focusing on insurance. So I went and joined him during the summer, started working with him. There were a couple guys in the office. The office sold everything, but I was most interested in selling business insurance. And ultimately, he and the other partner that he had split up. And the partner that split up with him wanted to focus more on financial planning and future planning for business owners. Steve was going to focus more on full service insurance agency.
So he had gotten out of the mortgage side because of 2008, 2009?
Pretty much, yeah. I mean, he still had his ability to sell mortgages, but there was just nothing there.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And so insurance is what he was doing. So when he broke off with that gentleman, I contacted that gentleman and said, hey, why don't we start a business-oriented insurance agency together? And I'll focus on the insurance, you focus on the financial planning and financial tools, and off we went. So that was called Red Rock Financial Group at the time. I had a room about the size of this studio here, which was my bedroom, and so I went to Home Depot and bought a wooden fence and split the room in half with a wooden fence. I had a bed on one side and a desk on the other, and that was the global headquarters for Red Rock Financial Group. I lived with like six other college guys, and they would throw things at me when I was in there making cold calls. Or
how all great businesses start, in the bedroom or the garage.
Yeah, in a barn. So at that point, I actually ended up selling the property management business back to the owners or to another property management company. and was out of that. And my plan was to build.
Did that give you some cash? Or was pretty
a little bit enough to
nothing to note?
No. We're talking tens of, in the tens of thousands, enough to pay off debt, move on from college, sign a lease in Phoenix, that type of stuff. But it did pay for college, it did pay for lifestyle, so it was definitely a worthy endeavor. So now insurance agency is growing. Ultimately, I start to focus on workers' compensation. And so for those that don't know, workers' compensation is a required insurance for anyone who has employees. It pays for their injuries, their medical bills if they get injured on the job. It also pays for their lost income if their injury prevents them from going back to work. So I was really focused on selling that. And that really started to grow. We kind of carved out a niche in high risk, hard to place accounts. We got a name there. So the accounts that started calling us were bigger and higher risk and harder to place. And as they got bigger and bigger, we just, we had a brand that spoke to that. And so did a lot of staffing companies, mining exposure, construction and industry.
You were underwriting these work comp policies with large organizations.
Yeah,
correct?
we're a brokerage.
We're
a brokerage. Okay. So we had, in some cases later on in the game, we had what we would call programs, where we had a special arrangement with an insurance carrier where we actually have the ability to issue our own policies and whatnot. But generally, we were a brokerage.
Okay.
And so fast forward now, I graduated college, moved to Phoenix, continued to grow the agency. End up, my partner at that time, who was older, we separated. He went and focused in the financial planning realm, and I focused in the insurance realm. So, and specifically in that workers' comp space. So we're growing and growing and growing. We get a couple large contracts through various, we call them employee leasing organizations, PEOs, doesn't really matter.
And when you say you split, legally you split the entity, or you guys geographically split, or, and I'll get back to why I asked that question, or did you still own the business together?
We split. I started a new business.
Okay.
And the insurance customers, the property and casualty insurance companies came with me.
Okay.
Everything that was financial planning and his focus went with him. And
it was an amicable, because you guys were kind of specializing, if you will.
Yeah, for the most part. He and I were very different. We had different visions for the business, different visions. I think ultimately the majority of the splits that I've had with partners over the years have come down to different beliefs in how to treat people.
Oh,
I always wanted to scale the business. I always believed that the sum of the individual value of a team was greater than our individual parts. And most partners I've had until recently didn't necessarily share that. And so they wanted to be what I would call highly compensated producers versus building an enterprise.
Sure.
And so typically splits were, I want to scale this and build enterprise. And they're like, okay, I just want to keep doing my thing. So it's like, cool, we'll go this way. So
yeah, and there's nothing wrong with either one of them. But what is important is that you identified that.
Sure.
Because I've known business partners where there is that dichotomy, but they still continue to try to ride on the same train. And that only gets harder and harder to make that break as a business gets larger and larger, if there is that dichotomy and what your ultimate goals of where you take the company is.
Yeah, I think in business, it's like breakups, right? The only split where both parties are happy is maybe a buyout, maybe a buyout, or maybe the buyout is where you're least angry.
Yeah.
But splits are like breakups. There's always wounds. No one ever leaves super happy. No one's perfectly pleased, but hopefully you do everything as best you can without the intention to hurt anyone else. And you can leave with your head held high and you wish that person the best. I don't think there's a partner I've ever had, and I've had some dicey breakups, but I don't think there's ever a partner, staff member, or person I've worked with where if they called me today with a personal emergency or challenge, I wouldn't pick up that phone call and talk to them.
That's fantastic.
So that's just my approach. I don't know that they'd ever want to talk to me, but that's my approach.
Yeah, and I think we talk a lot about business partners, and I've talked in front of college groups, and I've been asked the question, how did you find your business partner? I've talked about my first business partner in the garbage company, Joe, and we didn't really even have any business getting together. We just didn't know each other, but we were incredibly blessed. It worked out. But a lot of people, I've learned
rare,
since
man.
that it is, and
rare.
I've learned the hard way in businesses after we sold that one. But so we'll talk a little bit more about business partners and what advice you would give to someone. And I always ask everybody that I talk to, do you need one? Do you not need one? And there's always a wide range of views. But to your point, that's a sign of any good deal, where everybody feels like they both got a little bit screwed and they're unhappy.
Yeah,
So.
yeah, I totally agree with that. And so, pushing through the insurance story, ultimately, I wanted to scale the business faster than it was growing. And so I wanted some money. And there was a gentleman that had been recruiting me for some time, actually, ironically, from Tucson, 2 partners. They wanted to essentially acquire my business for an equity swap and put me in charge of business development, sales, and whatnot as a partner, and scale the thing. So,
This is how long into when you had gotten into insurance?
Agency was started in 2009. Now we're probably 2015.
Okay.
Something like that.
About 6 years.
Yeah, maybe 5 years. Maybe it was 2014.
Okay.
So we're over the hump at this point. We've got a decent clip going in terms of sales and revenue. It's still small, but we're going to make it, so to speak.
Yep.
It's still a small business for sure, more of a lifestyle business, if you will, but with the goal of getting it further down the road.
It's helping you live, pay the bills, and there's opportunity to grow.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And so I put that off for a while, and then I finally said, you know what, I'm gonna take this deal, because I'm just not gonna get to where I want at the speed I'm going if we don't have some funding behind it. So I took the deal around 2014, 2015, get involved. Business is essentially a dumpster fire at the time. And the one partner who was the insurance producer was doing a lot of the right things for the wrong reasons. And, I think I was talking to somebody the other day about the show American Greed, and I think 90% of the stories that you hear on American Greed, they don't start with somebody that was trying to do something wrong. They start with somebody who made one wrong decision and then makes a whole bunch of wrong decisions trying to cover that original decision up, right? So
it's never the crime, it's the cover-up, right?
Yeah, without going into details or names or whatnot, there was some stuff going on. And so the other partner, who was the money behind it, he said, Ben, I want you to kind of look into this. I said, well, it's really not what I'm here for. And he goes, well, I need your help. I need you to look into it. I said, okay, fine. So we start digging in a little deeper. We find a whole litany of problems. And so the investor partner says, okay, we're gonna remove this other partner. He was actually in vacation in Hawaii at the time with his family. He said, when we come back, we're going to sit down with him. We're going to tell him what's going on, what we found out. We're going to change his position. We're going to remove him as a partner, and you're going to take over.
And these 2 weren't brothers or anything like that. They were just happened to be partners.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I'm going, okay, this should be fun. Guy comes back from family vacation, sits down with us. He starts the conversation by telling us he's just been diagnosed with stage 4 cancer, lung cancer, and he's got 6 or 7 months to live. So I look at the other partner and I'm just like, okay, well, now what are we going to do? So we obviously don't bring up anything. Meeting adjourns.
And he has no idea.
Yeah, he goes, so what did you guys want to meet about? And we're like, oh, just welcome back. So he leaves. I talk to their partner and he goes, well, let me think about this for a little while. And ultimately, as we're thinking about what to do, the partner that was sick, he only lived a few weeks. He lived he was supposed to have 6-7 months, and it was less than a month, if I recall correctly. It was a very, very short period of time. Point is, we never had the conversation with him about what was going on. We ultimately had to have it with his wife, right, who then inherited his partnership and, everything that comes with that.
That might have been worse.
It was
a tougher conversation.
I don't know. I mean, who knows?
Yeah.
There was no easy way out of that situation.
No.
There was no right way. Mm-hmm. It was a dark room. Pick your door. Mm-hmm. So the remaining partner, the investor partner said, okay, this is yours now. Congratulations. We restructured the original deal to make it a merger and basically give me a better position in the firm, knowing what we knew now.
So you went back to when you originally went with them and basically restructured the paperwork.
I said, yeah, I brought this to the table and you supposedly brought this, but you actually brought this. And I will say the investor partner I had, fantastic. Yeah. I really trusted him. Again, different views on how we manage people and how we treat people. But other than that, I really trust him. I still do. I care greatly about him. And he took incredible care of me. And it was about doing the right thing always. And so this was the right thing at the time to fix the problem. And
you both agreed on that, doing the right thing.
Yeah.
And if there's one thing to look for in a business partner, if you can identify that someone doesn't have that basic moral underpinning of just do the right thing. Now, I know a lot of people say that, but you can usually, after a few interactions with people, figure out whether they're legitimate about that or whether it's just, they're just trying to say that to get what they want. That's so incredibly important.
You see it through action, and I'll be honest, where I saw his actions, he had every right at this time to sue this individual to the end of the earth, to sue his estate, to do crazy things. And, the wife in theory owed him hundreds of thousands of dollars. I mean, he could have taken some serious action in this case. There was life insurance involved, and he said, you know what, I've made my money. I'm going to give it all to their family. When we later sold the insurance agency, he actually set up 2 college funds for the deceased individual's children. And this was a person who had cost him hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Wow.
And in the face of all that, he stepped back and said, hey, I'm gonna put money in here for the wife. And we actually continued to pay her for an extended period of time. And when I saw him do that, I was just floored. And I said, okay, I think this is someone who, I mean, when are you going to find a business partner where you can say, well, at least I know if I die, he'll take care of my family. So, and
almost impossible.
Almost impossible. So that was the moment I was like, all right, it's worth it to fix this thing and go down this road with this individual. So that was, again, probably around 2014, 2015. It was one of the craziest times of my life. I worked nonstop for a while to figure it out. And we ultimately did.
This is before you're married. You don't have the tank yet.
That's
that's his nickname for his oldest son. We'll get more into your family because you guys are going to be having another one.
We are, we are.
Congratulations.
I don't know if she's announced publicly yet.
I'll just take that out of the podcast.
No, it's fine. You can leave it in because she'll probably send it out today. I'll make sure send it out today. So, Lindsay and I met in college. And so we had dated in college for a while. We had dated after college, and then we took a break. And we can talk more about that later, but ultimately found our way back together. This period of time was while we were on our break.
Okay.
And that may be the only reason why we are together now, because had I been dating anyone at that time, I was unavailable. I was so buried in what we were doing and so invested in it. The hours were crazy. And at the time, I was also working at nights because I didn't have enough money. I was putting all the money back in the business. Yeah. So I was bartending at nights at a place called Sapporo, which is now called Kasai. It's a teppanyaki restaurant in
Where
Scottsdale.
Is it?
It's in like central North Scottsdale, right by Raw, the sushi place.
Yeah.
And
you bartended? I didn't know that.
I bartended, served, all kinds of stuff.
I wonder how you know your drink so well.
Yeah, I always got it. I was always doing something. So but I bartended there for probably 2.5 years while we were building the insurance agency. And so ultimately, the agency starts to grow pretty well. We really start to focus on growing the workers' comp book. Things are going great from a growth standpoint. And as we get bigger, as we start to hire more and whatnot, again, you start to see this difference in mindset develop between how I want to scale with people and how I want to treat and manage and lead those people, and how he wanted to approach that. And from how people are compensated to their roles, autonomy, and authority in the office to culture, big disagreements there. And with him, for me, it was never a trust issue. It was just a fundamental disagreement on, I think we should go right, and you think we should go left. And it became clear that the personnel challenges we were having, because his approach to people, excuse me, were going to create a significant impediment from ever having a really significant staff and a culture that I felt would be productive. And maybe I was right, maybe I was wrong, I don't know. But that's how I felt. And so he was building a portfolio of companies, and he wanted to sell the insurance company because he wanted to focus on the other portfolio companies. And so for me, it was an interesting opportunity to exit. And so we ultimately did sell it. We did a nationwide search, and ironically, we sold it to a brokerage here in Arizona that was just up the block. And that brokerage is called Capital West Insurance. 2 partners, Nico and Minas Karougalos, brothers, best partners on planet Earth as far as I'm concerned. Except for maybe your garbage buddy, Joe. But ultimately, they bought the business. And like with many businesses, the key individual had to stay. So I was the key individual. So I had to stay for a period of 18 months. My old partner felt that after that 18 months, I was going to go back and help him build the portfolio companies. My plan was to probably go off and do my own thing, but I was going to see it out and see how it goes. I wasn't totally done with insurance yet. I had a lot of frustrations with insurance. The biggest one was as a brokerage, we were really just a pumped up sales team. And we didn't control the product. I was building a team, I was building a book, but I wasn't building the way that I wanted to. I couldn't pull all the levers. in putting, it was like putting the car together again, but I just had a wrench.
Yeah.
And if you had a bad experience as a customer, I couldn't fix it, right? If your claim was poor, if the price was wrong, I didn't control any of these things. I just controlled how we sell stuff. It wasn't challenging enough to me. I wanted to be involved in more. And there's this weird relationship with your customers where even if I save you $1 million, you still hate me for the other $1 million you still have to pay because you don't want this insurance in the first place, right?
The conundrum of insurance.
Right, it's a commodity, right?
Yeah.
And so if they start selling gas down the street for $1 cheaper, guess where you're buying your gas now? And I got that. Eventually it was going to be automated. Eventually it was going to get away from brokers. And I kind of felt that. I wanted to do something where my staff and team was more attached to what we were doing because there was real passion. We weren't just peddling. And also there was a real appreciation from our customers about what we were doing. And insurance, no matter how hard I tried, always lacked those two things. So anyways, Capital West acquires the business and I worked there for 18 months, which turned into 2 years. And it was going really well. The partners there and I see eye to eye on almost
What were their
everything.
names again?
Nico and Minas Karougalos. And we see eye to eye on almost everything. I knew there was a fundamental difference with them as potential partners than anyone else because no matter how bad things got or how challenging things got, we never raised our voice, ever. And I can't say that for any partner I previously had, especially not over the amount of time that we've worked together now, 4 or 5 years, 6 years, never raised our voice. Calm, cool, collected, caring, compassionate, but also tremendously focused, tremendously motivated, tremendously skilled, big dreams. It's not for lack of ambition that they're so calm. It's just because they're level-headed, and we work better together. And so there's never any reason to go like this.
Great,
and that was different.
Yeah.
So
now they're private equity guys.
they are now. So Minas' background, he did a stint in private equity. Then he did some government consulting for a few years in Washington, D.C. Nico's background was in mortgages.
Okay.
And so he built a big mortgage business, great financial crisis, got out of that. Then he started the insurance agency, and a few years later, his brother came to help him run it from the financial and operations side. So they were now buying books. We were probably their 5th or 6th acquisition, one of the larger ones so far. And their plan was to continue to grow the book that way. In 2019, the book had gotten pretty substantial, and they sold it to PCF Insurance, which is a national private equity roll-up. Okay. To give you some idea, PCF Insurance wasn't even on the map at that time. Now they are the 13th or 12th or 13th largest revenue-producing P&C agencies in the nation, with thousands and thousands of employees and hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue. So it's
P&C, personal and commercial.
PCF Insurance Services is the name of it. And it's an amazing organization. It's grown, with tremendous pace. So Minas is now head of acquisitions of M&A for PCF, and Nico is head of a number of the different business units under them, but running the operations and sales and whatnot within Capital West and all the other agencies that fall under that.
So their primary strategy, PCF, was basically, if we're going to grow, we're just going to do M&A across the country, and we're going to find all these small insurance brokerages, and then we're going to leverage the we're basically leveraging multiple escalation on EBITDA, right? Yeah. So and I'm not speaking necessarily to PCF strategy directly, but all private equity roll-ups as I know them, right, is okay, if I have $500 million in revenue and $100 million in EBITDA, I'm going to get a 25 multiple, right? If you have a business that has $2 million in revenue and $500,000 in EBITDA, you're going to get a 4. So I can pay you a 9 or a 10 or a 12, which is ridiculous for your business. No one in their right mind would ever pay that for your business because it's not worth that. But I don't care because I want the delta between what I pay you and 25. Yep.
So if I have enough money to go out and buy 500 versions of you and put them together, I can refinance them to the next biggest fish, the next private equity fund upstream, right? And get my multiple escalation. And it's all multiple escalation.
Yeah, and obviously they can get synergies. That was the word I was trying to think of. The synergies you get by doing that is incredible.
I think, when you look at like in construction, right, you'll see a lot of it in food manufacturing and agriculture. There's like vertical integration of I'm buying these businesses to streamline production, streamline supply chain, whatever it may be. I think when you look at these roll-up projects in private equity, it's truly about as much EBITDA as fast as possible. And it's just an economics thing. I don't think in many cases, actually in a lot of the roll-ups I see in service-based businesses like insurance, there's zero interaction between the various entities that get bought. In fact, they say, look, we're going to come in, we're going to buy you. Tomorrow morning, nothing's going to change. We're going to give you a good amount of cash, and you're going to get a bunch of stock in our business. And that's going to be the structure of the acquisition. Maybe there's an earnout, maybe there's not. And then what's going to happen is over the next 5 years, we're going to continue to do this. And the stock that you got in our business is going to be worth 10x what it was worth in your business, regardless of the fact that we gave you cash.
So they're all financial purchases, but they must get some synergies on the overhead. I mean, that's how a lot of these roll-ups work. Even if whether they're a strategic purchase or a financial purchase, is you take a lot of that bureaucracy at the head of the beast, if you will, and still let these operations work. Or is that not the case in this scenario?
I think you always see some of that. I think it sounds better than it actually executes, right?
Sure.
Bigger is not easier, right, in anything. And so, you know, when you look at the HR function, when you have 30 employees versus 30,000, I don't know that it's going to be less bureaucratic, right? I think there is an outsourcing.
No, it's going to be more bureaucratic,
right,
for sure. You can spread the fixed cost over a lot more.
You're going to dump
revenue.
it. You're going to dump it is what's going to happen. Now I don't have to deal with it anymore, right? No. You're going to take over my HR, finance and accounting to some extent, payroll, debt service, all that stuff. All I have to do now is focus on my brand and my growth. And in theory, I should be able to grow more. And I think you get buy-in from owners sometimes with that. I think other times owners say, that all sounds good. I'll take my check and my stock, and I'm gonna check out. The cool thing with PCF is you know, at least within our group of it, we continue to see significant engagement from the leaders within the business units, and you do continue to see significant organic growth. And on the flip side, you know, it's performing incredibly well. So that's been really neat to watch, and it's also taught me to see how long it took me to go from 0 to $1 million in revenue in insurance, and then to go from $1 million to $3 million. And then once we were with Capital West, to watch it go from 3 million to 30 million or whatever it ended up at, right? That took years and years and years. And they've gone from where they started, I don't know where that was, to number 13 in the country in 3 years' time.
Yeah,
and it's just incredible. It's incredible, the velocity of money and the velocity of growth when you fund it that way. I mean, it really is.
Well, it's a genius model, especially, you know, you talk about how they've got owners buy-in. Well, sure, you continue, and correct me if I'm wrong, as they get larger, you are incredibly incentivized to help them get larger because you have a good portion of stock. So when they ultimately, as you described earlier, sell this big piece to someone else who's going to pay an X multiple, you benefit from it. All these companies that they bought to get as large as they are benefit, right?
Yeah. And when you look at the top companies on that list, right, of published by the Insurance Journal or whoever it is, most of them are roll-ups of some kind. You know, I won't name all the names, but they're pretty much all private equity-backed roll-ups of some kind. In fact, the competitive landscape's getting interesting because you're running out of, there's just not as many targets.
Well,
and so then they start these bidding wars, and it changes it. But yeah, they actually pay, there's referral fees, right? Typically, if I've sold and I can now go get my friend to sell, there's some incentive there. But yeah, you want to build the stock up as much as you can. So everyone starts to shift that focus to stock price and EBITDA, both cost control and growth, versus, you know, whatever your focus may have been prior to.
Yeah.
So
strategic alignment, which is just genius on again on the way that they are growing, and it keeps you involved or incentivized. Correct?
Totally.
So you sell. You're not involved, but you are involved.
Yeah, my role at this point is, you know, I've got a book of business and I'm responsible for maintaining and growing that book of business. Some key customers that I'm really focused on, taking care of and whatnot. But in, you know, around that 2000, as soon as I started with Capital West, I had this idea around fixing the occupational healthcare problem, right? Which sounds grandiose, but it wasn't that big at the time. The issue was we had these customers who were buying workers' comp, their costs were going through the roof, and they were looking to us as consultative brokers to lower their costs. And it was very obvious that where the problem was coming from was from the medical model, because doctors make money when patients stay in the system longer. the more volume there is, the more charge codes there are, the more money they make. So any doctor or any medical group that tells you they're not focused on what they call the lifetime value of a patient is lying. That's like the number one thing you talk about in your strategy meetings. In occupational health care, there's this misconception that doctor and medical provider thinks, well, employer has insurance. So if I charge for whatever, the company doesn't have to pay for it. The insurance company pays for it. So they don't care. The employee gets health care, goes back to work. Employer doesn't have to pay for it. Insurance company pays for it. Everybody's happy. I get a big paycheck. It doesn't actually work that way. Workers' comp's really set up as a financing model where people are financing their own claims over time. It actually costs, small claims specifically, cost employers a fortune.
And anybody that's run a business and had to pay for workman's comp, especially, we're in the construction industry. I mean, the mods and the rates in the construction industry are ridiculous. And if we have any claims, you can bet when you get reanalyzed, boom, your rates. It's just logic, right?
Exactly.
It's logic.
And the funny thing is, that's what I learned in the insurance world. Working with the companies that we work today, oftentimes they don't care about that stuff. I've been told a dozen times by project managers, Ben, your experience mod, mathematics, magic, that's 3 years down the road. I'm just trying to be in business next month. And the reality is, I care more about the guy who's now stuck in the system, who can't come back to work, because I got to pay him to be at the clinic or be at home. I got to pay a supervisor to manage him, and I got to pay 2 people to replace those people on the job site. My budget for next week is totally screwed, and I got to figure out how to make a payroll in 2 weeks. So that is a bigger problem for me than what's going to happen 3 years down the road. And that's been a shift of our mindset as we've worked into this business. But back to the story. So I was searching for a medical provider who would align with my thought process and for the insurance customers. And it became clear that there was this huge gap and this huge need. And then I bumped into my now partner, Dr. Johnson, Dr. Gregory Johnson. Dr. Johnson's been running a clinic here in Phoenix for probably, he'd kill me for saying this, but over 30 years. And he's really the last remaining dinosaur in what he would call industrial medicine or occupational health care that is really focused on doing it in a way that appropriately takes care of the employee with a focus on getting them back to work, which most times is where they want to be, back to work with a sense of dignity, but also doing it in a way that doesn't intentionally harm the employer. We use the analogy of being like a team doctor, right, for the NFL team. Everybody's goal is to win the Super Bowl. You only win the Super Bowl if your best players are on the field playing in a way that's not putting themselves in harm's way or others in harm's way. The team doctor has to represent both the individual's healthcare and their well-being, but I also have to represent the team's best interest in making decisions to put people in or out of the game at the right time to ensure that when we get to the Super Bowl, we get there, and when we get there, Tom Brady's on the field, right, or whomever.
That's an excellent analogy.
And it is how it should be, right? And so we use that team doctor. It should never be, when LaDainian Tomlinson is hurt and he can't pick up the football, you don't run him down to the local ER, right? Or you don't take him down to the urgent care and say, how long is this guy going to be out, right? Because they don't get it. They don't understand your business.
Yeah.
They don't understand the dedication of those players, what they're willing to put in. They don't understand the goals and whatnot. They don't understand the facilities and resources that are available to those players through the team. This is exactly how it works in enterprise, believe it or not. And until you are a team doctor and understand all of that, and understand that most of these tenured journeyman individuals in construction industry, they want to play, and they want to play at a high level. They want to earn their wage with dignity, and they don't want to be in the workers' comp system. And so Dr. Johnson believes that, and he refers to his patients as industrial athletes, right, which is a term that's used a lot now. But anyways, when I found him, I was like, this is our guy. We start referring customers to him and working with him, and I said, this is cool. I love this. There's such a high interest in this and such a gap. It seems obvious. I don't know why more people aren't doing this. I want to do this. And we would sit in front of customers and talk about this. They never even asked me the price. That whole thing I was talking about before of they were so interested in what we were talking about, and he was so passionate about what he was doing. Those two things I talked about earlier of wanting to build a culture where the staff were actually passionate about the product and the service, and being able to having a customer relationship where they really valued what we were doing. Like, the lights went off when I saw Dr. Johnson's relationship with both his staff and his customers. I was like, this is it.
You saw a huge gap in the market and you said, we've got to fill this.
Yeah, and there didn't used to be a gap because all the big players, which are now our competitors, they used to do what he did. But what they did is when their revenue got to sort of plateau, they say, well, how else can we monetize these patients, right? And they'd start buying up physical therapy offices, or they'd introduce other services to provide to these patients, which are all focused on keeping them in the system longer. So now you got a guy working for semiconductor plant who's getting paid 150 G's a year doing very, very skilled labor. He sprains his finger. And the urgent care says, well, you're going to be off work for 6 months and you need 50 physical therapy visits and it's going to cost a fortune, right? And it just doesn't make sense. So now that the team doctor is now actively working to keep your players off the field.
Yeah.
And more businesses have gone that direction instead of saying, how can I just do this better, the occupational healthcare thing better? Dr. Johnson is the last man standing, in my opinion, in at least in Arizona, and doing it that way. And so I approached him and said, hey, what do you think about scaling this business and taking what you have? And at first the idea was putting it on wheels, right? Let's make a mobile business where we can take the small injuries, we can kind of be an Uber of urgent care, a mobile of urgent care, and go to the customer location and treat them there. We can have a telemed function, we can have a mobile function, and then for those folks that have a higher acuity injury, they can come to the clinic. This will help get people out of your clinic. They don't need to be there. It'll help us service more people, and then we can make the Dr. Johnson model available, hopefully all over the country.
So you're selling workman's comp. You're trying to find something that better suits your companies because you see the problem with the overall system. You somehow come in connection with Dr. Johnston. You start just referring to him, and that helps his practice. You realize this opportunity. You go to Dr. Johnston, approach him, and say, let's scale this.
Yeah, essentially. Well, I think my first couple of approaches were, let me buy this. He told me to pound sand. And so after a couple go-arounds of that, I finally said, okay, well, what are my options? And maybe we can be partners. And so that's how it was born. And so we started On-Site Medical, and really our core competency was supposed to be this mobile business. So we launched it. We were using independent contractors at the time. We were really thinking it was going to be this Uber of urgent care.
What year is this? You launch it?
2017, right when I sold to Capital West is when we started working on it.
Okay.
We formally incorporated, I think, early 2018. And then one of the great things about the Capital West partners was they are investors in On-Site. And so they allowed me to work on this project while we were also working on the insurance agency. So it gave me this great ramp and this great runway. And the concept was, if we keep growing the workers' comp book and we build this product, we'll be able to attract bigger workers' comp customers because we'll have this lights out solution that we control, and we'll be able to use both of these tools for all of our customers, and so on and so forth.
There was opportunity for both things you were involved in to be symbiotic.
Exactly. It was going to be a mousetrap for us. I don't think we thought it was going to grow the way that we did it as fast as it did. And the biggest error that we had in our judgment as to how it was going to play out is we thought we were going to continue to attract the same size customers from a demographic standpoint at On-Site that we were attracting at the insurance agency. And the reality is we quickly moved into Fortune 500 mega companies because the product that we had was so sought after and the reputation that we had was so rock solid. And the customer Rolodex was so rock solid that suddenly these companies became companies that we simply couldn't insure. They are just too big. So we were approached by a very large semiconductor manufacturing company here in the Valley, global company. And they said, hey, we love this mobile business. We love Dr. Johnson. we're going to start rebuilding one of our fabs. We need an on-site medical provider. Would you want to put somebody out here full time? I said, well, we haven't really done that, but yeah, that would be cool. It makes sense. On-site medical, on-site clinic. Let's try it out. So we did that. We did our first one probably at the end of 2018. So this is pretty close to when we were getting started. And
they reached out to you or you reached out to them?
We had a relationship with them where we were providing mobile service and they were using the clinic. They had providers at their location in the past. That's not a new model. I mean, businesses do that. Mining companies, remote oil and gas, like they usually 100%. Have EMTs, whatever on site. So that's model's been around forever. mobile medical is also not a game changer. The difference for us is how we treat things and how we bill. And we can talk more about that if we want to. But they said, hey, we are now spooling up again. We're going to have enough people here where it makes sense to have our own medical team on site. You guys want to do it because you're the gold standard. If not, we'll go somewhere else. We said, yeah, we'll try it out. So that was really the birth of what on-site is today. And so today, 75% of our revenue comes from on-site clinics. So we still have the mobile business. We plan to scale that in other states around the country. Right now, we're just in Arizona, Phoenix, and Tucson metro areas. We opened up a physical urgent care in Tucson that is similar to AIM Clinic, right, and sees patients for all of our customers and has a mobile business working around it. And then we have, I think, somewhere between 25 and 30 of these on-site clinics around the country, from California, although I think our furthest one is in Massachusetts, of all places. And
so you have no overhead real estate costs for these on-site clinics because it's really under the company's house.
Yep.
Your obvious largest line item is salaries because you need professional, whether it's PAs or registered nurses. Do you have any doctors, or you don't need doctors at this point?
We have Dr. Johnson. We have another doctor, Dr. Mohammed Vaziri, who serves as a medical director out of state. We have Dr. Stephanie Lundell, who's an expert in a certain part of the business. So we have physicians that we're working with, but most of the on-site clinics operate with either EMTs, paramedics, or RNs. Nurse practitioners and physician's assistants are also something that we work a lot with, but bulk of the on-site clinics are RNs and EMTs. We don't have real estate costs. If we do, we pass it through to the provider, or to the company. Most of the customers actually provide the space for us. We work in all kinds of crazy situations, everything from converted offices to construction trailers to a converted security shack during COVID, to our premier customers build us, permanent structures at their facilities. And so while, the business model in our minds when we started out, which is never the way it actually goes, the business model is, okay, look, all of our competitors, they service the Phoenix metro area, for an example, with 13 locations, right? Huge overhead, and which drives their cost and therefore drives what they charge to the customers. With us, we can service that same metro area with 1, maybe 2 locations, and the mobile business operating around it. And those efficiencies allow us to operate lean and to charge a fair price and to not have to focus on this lifetime value of the patient. Rather, it's, hey, we're going to do a great job, charge a fair price, get this person back in the game, and in return for that, you're going to love us and you're going to send us all of your other business. And the on-site clinics, though, have really grown for us. And it's the same model. It's the same care. It's the same message. It's the same brand. We're doing the same thing. It's team doctor. But the funny thing is, now you actually really feel like a team doctor. Like, now we're in the stadium, right? Now we have a physical presence in the stadium. We are part of your team, fully integrated in your business. I'm not coming out to treat one injury. Like, I'm responsible for all 16,000 workers on that job site every day. And it's crazy. I mean, you talk about impact, like, across this, we have challenging situations. I mean, we have deaths, we have suicides, we've had a murder, we have mostly what you would imagine, right? Low acuity injuries. We also have a mountain of mental health challenges, substance abuse. We get people that come into the clinics that just need someone to talk to because they're going through a divorce or a tough time, or they're having challenges with their kids. I mean, it's so much bigger than putting Band-Aids on fingers, which is what the idea was originally. And so the impact that it starts to have on the individuals, but also the companies, is extraordinary. And it's meaningful. And therefore the staff, right, the providers, they become very attached and passionate about what they're doing because they see the impact. And here we are now starting to run a business where staff is excited, staff is passionate, so you can effectively build culture, you have buy-in, customers are satisfied, they appreciate what you're doing, you're saving them way more money than they're spending, so they are really attached, they have a quality relationship with mutual respect and appreciation, and you start to see culture build around that. And now we don't have to make 500 cold calls every day, right? Suddenly our phone starts to ring, and it's been cool. We have carved out by whatever it was, blessing or good luck or timing or whatever, starting in semiconductor in 2018 was, incredible. And so a lot of people, if you've ever read the book Chip War, it's a fascinating book. All of our customers are featured in it. It's about the history of the semiconductor space, but semiconductor over the next 5 to 10 years and possibly forever, it's the gold rush,
it's
right?
It's the industry to be in right now.
Yeah, it's the gold rush.
Especially here in the Metro Valley. The number of companies moving here and building here is mind-boggling.
Yeah, so our industries are, what you'd expect. There's some construction, a lot of solar, agriculture. We actually do a lot with building of hospitals. You name it. Our clinics don't last forever sometimes, so we've probably had a total of 35, 40 clinics, but most of them are pretty long-term, multi-year projects. Some of them have been operating for, since we started, and will operate for another 10 years. But
your opportunity to scale this is, as you guys have already identified, astronomical. It's
it's like a virus. It's so one of the things where I was going was our biggest space is semiconductor and tech in general. So if you put semiconductor and data center in the same tech category, that's where we're at. And at this point, the word gets around, right? Mm-hmm. Because the general contractors that are building and servicing these facilities, there's only a handful of them that can do it. And so once we have a reputation with them, every time they get a new contract, we get a new contract. And one thing that always drove me nuts about having a service business was I was never going to create that cool thing that, like, if you listen to like how I built this on like Calendly, right?
Yeah.
It's, well, our service sells itself, because if I'm using Calendly, I send you an invite, you have to accept my invite in order for you to use, and now you're using Calendly, right? And so on and so forth. I'm like, man, how are we ever going to do that with mobile medicine, right? It's always going to be cold calling and all this BS. But the reality is, by having the on-site clinics, if we're there, and now you've got 8,000, 10,000, whatever workers coming on site every day, a revolving door of all the best of breed contractors in the area coming in to do whatever they're doing, and they say, oh, you do this here, where else can you do this? Well, if you're big, we can do it at one of your job sites. If you don't have the budget for that, we can provide the mobile business, right? And oh, by the way, we'll go anywhere that we can with you in the country. And so now people look at like our geographic footprint. They're like, why the heck are you in Massachusetts? I don't really want to be in Massachusetts, but or California or New York. But the reality is, we get a phone call from our customer that says, hey, we need you in this place now, and we just go, right? Yeah. And it's so rare. We are not looking for, people always say, how do you vet your customers? We're not looking for belly buttons or budget. We're looking for culture. Mm-hmm. If you're someone who believes in safety and prevention and this concept of, if you view your employees as industrial athletes and you truly believe in that, and you have a culture built around that, then you're probably doing screening, you're probably doing physicals, you're probably doing preventative medicine, you're treating them appropriately when they're injured, you're doing all the things you need to get to that Super Bowl with that team. That's what we're looking for. And sometimes a company with 50 employees will have more spend than one with 5,000 because they care.
Yeah.
And so we're looking for alignment with certain brands. And then when we find that alignment, it's okay, how many other opportunities do we have to service you in other places?
So you've talked about explosive growth, and I want to wrap up on-site medical specifically, and then talk about concepts that our listeners desperately want from you about entrepreneurship, getting started, risks, business partners, trusting your gut, fear, toughest days of your life. Growth. You started with how many employees? You have how many employees now?
Started with one, right? Or maybe two, Dr. Johnson, if you count him. Now we're going through some implementations right now, so we'll probably have 60 in about another 2 weeks, something like that.
So you've grown very, very fast over a 5-year time period?
Yeah. And really it's come, like most businesses, right? It's really come in the last 2 years. I mean, we probably went from 3 years, we probably went from 0 to 20, and then we've gone from 20 to 60 in the last 24 months.
Kind of hit your stride, and then it just exponential.
Yeah. Chips bill passed.
I would call it blessed that you guys got into the semiconductor industry, because that's, foresight, blessing, because that's where to be, as you said. We talk a lot about this, and the reason I started this is to be a support group for anybody trying to do what you're doing, what I'm doing, what we've done. and what any entrepreneur or aspiring entrepreneur is doing, a business owner. Very volatile, the highs and the lows and the emotions. How have you, over all the experiences that you've gone through, you talked about one of the most challenging conflicts that you had to address that you didn't have to address in the way you expected, gotten through that? How have you, as just a human with that volatility, figured out how to navigate that and deal with it?
Well,
especially in the early days, it's the hardest. When finances are tight and you're growing something, we've all been there as entrepreneurs. And of course, when finances are challenging, that makes everything a lot more difficult or can heighten the senses, especially when you have families involved, you have business partners. But even when you're growing as fast as you're growing, there are magnitudes of problems. You have problems and they're sometimes magnified or amplified. And so that doesn't necessarily make it any easier, even if, well, when you're growing, you can grow broke, so you can still have some of those financial challenges. But throughout when you started and through your kind of as you've grown and you've seen the growth through the financial exercise, even as those has improved, which is, of course, one of the main things in business is you want to be sustainable, you want to be profitable. How do you deal with that? How has that changed for you as well as you've aged and matured to deal with that? And what advice would you give to someone who maybe is just starting out and they hear about that, how challenging it is mentally and emotionally, to help them understand how you've gotten through it?
It's a unique question, and if I thought about it for a couple of days, I don't know if my answer would be different than what I would say off the cuff, but a couple things come to mind. First of all, the early days, I think, are the easiest days. A hungry dog bites harder, period. A hungry dog runs farther because, you got nothing to lose. Your back's against the wall. And, worst case scenario, you just bartend at night. But you don't have, I think the biggest thing for me that's changed is at that time, forget money. You can always go bankrupt and come back from it, right? We have former presidents that have taught us that. But
it's interesting you say that, because in our economy, in our culture, and I've talked about this in some of my earlier podcasts, how that fear in my mind, because of what society viewed of going bankrupt, was so incredibly strong. But once I broke free and said, who cares? What's the worst that can happen if you go bankrupt? So I love that you toss it aside, because you've gotten to that point where I don't care if I ended up going bankrupt. I'll start over. We've seen people that have done it, and that's not a big concern for you. And I think that's awesome for a lot of people. That fear of failure, particularly bankruptcy, does grip them with a very tight hold.
Sure. Yeah, I get that. I understand. It's never going to go away. Fear is sometimes irrational, but sometimes it's our mind telling us we shouldn't be doing something, right?
Yeah.
That's why we don't like standing on the side of a cliff. I agree. A lot of people, I forget who wrote it when I first read it, but people say, oh, entrepreneurs are the biggest risk takers in the world, right? And they're fearless and they jump off the cliff without a parachute. And reality is, I once read that entrepreneurs are like the most calculated risk takers out there, because they think through things in great detail with data and research and whatnot to come to the best possible decision they think they can make. And quite frankly, oftentimes it's ultimately lower risk because of the due diligence, right? Yeah. So for me, I always felt that way. I never felt like I was running blind into the fire. It was by the time I made a decision to go do something, it was pretty obvious to me that it was going to work, right? It was obvious to me that the leasing thing was going to work after we leased a couple of houses. It was obvious to me that focusing on insurance in a particular way was going to work because we'd already sold 100 policies. It was obvious to me that the on-site medical thing was going to work because I saw the relationship through Dr. Johnson and his customers. And, I'm not an inventor, so I can't sit here and say that I'm an entrepreneur in the sense that I've ever invented something that changed the world, right? For me, it was more recognizing opportunity and taking the time to understand it, and then having the confidence to just go execute. We haven't changed the game in a lot of ways. We're just operating intelligently, and we're taking advantage of opportunity as it comes to us, and also doing some work to seek it out. But I don't think I'm a game changer beyond that.
Well, that's most entrepreneurs, quite frankly, what you described. Most entrepreneurs, we're not game changers. You identified an opportunity, you did your due diligence, and you had the confidence. I want to talk about that because that's key, and that only comes with experience and failing. That's the only way you can build that gut and confidence. And then you acted on it. It's not like you're revolutionizing the world, and quite frankly, the majority of us as entrepreneurs never revolutionize the world in that sense.
Right. So I think early on, I relate to, people that are hustling when they're in college or, skip college and are working 3-4 jobs. And I mean, that I get, right?
Mm-hmm.
The entrepreneur who is a single mom with 2 kids in her she's in her 30s or 40s, who has a game-changing idea and has to have the confidence to chase it then. I have so much respect for some of the people you see on Shark Tank or whatever it is, right?
Because when you said that was the first show that came to my mind.
Because I'm like, for me, you asked me how it's changed over time. Early on, didn't have much to lose, didn't care if I lost it all. But the biggest thing that's changed is not how I felt. I still feel that way about myself personally, but now it has impact on others.
You have a family. You have a responsibility other than yourself.
Yeah, it's so much bigger than just me. And so it's funny, before this, there was no stress with failure. Failure was actually easier than success because I didn't have to go to work the next day. But
I've never heard it quite put that way. That's an interesting way to look at it.
Go play golf or something. But, now it's like, I have my family. It's the obvious one, right? My wife and my son and all that. But, I can rebuild for my family over time. I believe that. But there's, 60 people that count on us who are not in a position to rebuild over time, and who might be at the end of their career or the middle stage of their career.
Your employees you're talking
about. Or have health problems, or have family members with health problems. Who knows what they're dealing with, right? They're dealing with mountains of stress. And also the customers that we impact, the promises I've made to my business partner. The list goes on and on and on. And so now, it's not as easy as just fail and restart, right? Now there's an impact that's significant. So I think the thing that I've noticed the most over the growth of any of these endeavors have been, as it gets bigger, the pressure gets greater. And the funny thing is, it's more money, more problems, right? It's more money doesn't necessarily mean more confidence. It doesn't necessarily mean smooth sailing. The risks are greater at that point, really, than the risks early on. Because risk is all about what do you have to lose, right?
Yeah.
If I buy a penny stock, am I really taking a risk?
Yep.
If I dump hundreds of $1,000s into Class A shares of Berkshire Hathaway, I got a lot to lose. I need that to perform, right? So that's really, risk is about how much is on the table. And now there's a lot of chips on the table, and that is extremely stressful.
That's a great point in putting that risk into perspective. I got us sidetracked a little bit. You were answering my original question about dealing with the highs and lows and the emotional volatility, and how you have found for yourself what you have found to be most successful to deal with that volatility.
Yeah, I've struggled with that. I think I have a tendency, if you want to get into the therapy chair here, I have a tendency to...
You find a cliff and then you skydive off of it. Well, he talked about him being adventurous. Richard Branson hasn't seen anything yet.
Yeah.
This Ben is crazy adventurous, which I admire and I'm a little jealous of.
I become hyperactive, right? And so I try and just keep running and fill my days with things, stay busy. And so I'm, whether I'm working or running triathlons or doing endurance cycling, I'm always just go. And a lot of the things I do outside of work are to help me detach. The only time, actually, we asked, we do an icebreaker at the beginning of all of our level 10 meetings. We had our leadership meeting today, and the icebreaker that Lisa Frieden, our president, gave was, name a time when you were most calm or at peace. And for me, I said, it's interesting. All of my times of being most calm or at peace are actually when I'm doing something that takes a great level of effort or a great level of intensity or focus, because it's the only time that my brain will detach from all of the other thoughts that it's usually chewing on. So descending my bike at 40 miles an hour down Mount Lemmon, or doing a woodworking project that fully consumes me because of the level of detail, significantly hard physical challenges and endeavors that focus you to focus in order to survive, piloting, right, where your life is on the line, whatever it may be. These things allow my mind to detach. And so I think finding ways to detach is what has allowed me to deal with the emotional volatility. I think the unfortunate thing for me is that sometimes there are negative ways to detach, right? Alcohol is one of them. I've had a lot of challenges with that. And
I think we all as humans deal with that. There are healthy ways to deal with that, and there are unhealthy ways, and that's finding that balance. And anybody who is an entrepreneur, quite frankly, even if you're not an entrepreneur, if you don't have the challenges like that of the healthy and the unhealthy, well, you're either not human or you're lying, and it's probably the second one.
Yeah, and for me, it's, if I'm worried about how I'm going to make payroll next week, I got 2 ways to forget about that on a Friday. I can go ride my bike until I'm going to fall off, and then figure out how to get home, or I can drink a bunch of IPAs, and both have negative effects on the body, but and the mind. But one is certainly worse than the other, and so for me. Now in today's world, because now the way I choose to detach also has effects on other people, right? My family, my friends, my loved ones, and ultimately how I return to work or don't. And so now I've always known how to detach. I've been really good at that, unfortunately. But now finding healthy ways to detach that also don't have negative impacts on other people is really one of the main focuses. I can't give you the answer how to do it today because I'm literally working through it as we speak. I just started on a new 6-month kind of wellness, mental health journey.
Sure.
I started it just a few days ago, and I'm really excited about that. But you got to find the things that allow your brain to be calm, to answer that question that Lisa posed, that are healthy, that don't have a negative impact on others, and allow you to return to your endeavor as refreshed as you possibly can.
I love that answer, Ben, because I think, number one, appreciate you being so candid and bringing that up, because sometimes people don't want to go towards our society. Oh, being an entrepreneur, it's so exciting, and this, that, and the other thing. Well, the reality is, yes, there's certainly that side of it. But the only way to get through that and experience those successes is understanding the healthy ways of what it takes to deal with getting to that point. And so I think this conversation is something that needs to be had more, because it is the reality of entrepreneurial. There's a lot of great things on it, but just like anything, you've got to find healthy ways to cope with the emotional volatility that it comes with.
I think balance is important too. I mean, I'm in Entrepreneurs Organization, great organization, encourage everybody to look into it. I have a forum that I'm in, confidential forum, but what I can say is everybody in that organization has stress, and that's ultimately in forum. That's the main thing we talk about is what's driving you nuts or what's making you want to jump off the cliff, right, so to speak. And I think one of the things I notice between people who seem to be healthier, and when I say healthier, I mean mental health, physical health, spiritual health, emotional health, are the people that have more balance. And for me, I work a lot less than a lot of people in that organization. I don't know if that means I'll ultimately won't have as much wealth as them or not. But what I do know is that I spend more time doing hobbies. This is kind of what we're talking about together. As my business gets bigger and the pressure gets higher and the stress gets higher, I find myself, like my dad, finding other things. And maybe it's about mastery, like we were talking about the original beginning of the podcast. Maybe it's finding a new way to detach. I don't know. But or new healthy way to detach. Doing those things, spending less time working all the time and more time working on me, allows me to crank the stress meter up higher Monday to Thursday or Monday to Friday, and then recover. I was listening to Dak Prescott's podcast a while back, and he was talking about alcohol and alcoholism and this same type of thing. And he goes,
Dak Prescott is the quarterback of Dallas Cowboys still, right?
No. The former actor.
Dak Prescott?
Oh gosh, I got his name wrong. What is it? It's Armchair Expert is the name of the podcast.
Let's just look it up.
Can you look it up? Yeah. You can edit this portion out.
Oh, this is real life, folks. We don't edit the good stuff. Armchair Expert. Here we go. It says Dax.
Dax, yes.
Dak Shepard.
There you go. Okay. I was testing it. You failed. So I was listening to one of Dak Shepard's Armchair Expert podcasts, and he was talking about how, and he was talking about more around substance and alcohol, but he was saying, okay, how are you this high functioning individual that does all this crazy stuff, but you also had all these crazy problems going on in your life? And he says, well, I was basically a Superman from Monday to Wednesday, or sometimes Monday to Thursday, and then I was the polar opposite from Thursday to Sunday, and then spent Sunday afternoon trying to recover to ready to be Superman, and just running yourself into the ground sometimes on this cycle. And I think you can do that with a lot of things. You can do that with alcohol, you can do that with your social life, but you can also do that with working too much. You can do it with having, too many hobbies where you're running too fast. So that balance becomes key. Whatever that detachment thing is, hopefully it's a healthy thing, but you got to watch that the balance is there so you have enough time to do both things, recover properly, and be able to return focused and clear, which may help you also decide what the detachment thing can be.
Well, and I think that's so relatable, and I think for anybody who's an entrepreneur, it is, I love working. I don't work to live, I live to work.
Right.
But as I've gotten older and have people that are important to me, particularly my nieces and nephews, and I see how much of their life I miss, you're forced in a positive way to find that balance. And what I found, and I'd be curious on your thoughts on this, and if you've experienced the same thing, it makes me be more efficient when I'm at work and actually more productive because I've got my priorities and I'm trying to find that balance. Whereas before, okay, you can be at work 16, 17 hours a day, and when you're working that much, you're maybe a little bit less productive, a little bit less efficient. But as you get that balance, the positive side can be, you have to be more efficient if you want to maintain that balance.
Well, the quality of work is better.
Yeah.
The quality of work is better.
Exactly.
I used to think I wasn't an entrepreneur if I wasn't sending an email at 2 o'clock in the morning. But then I read it the next day, it's all misspelled, it's misjumped. No one's buying from that guy because he's either wasted or he doesn't know what the heck he's talking about, right? And so the quality of work goes up too, and so I truly believe that balance is key.
What has been, through all of your experiences, the darkest day from a business perspective that you've had to deal with? And how did you get through that?
The darkest day, gosh.
Or the biggest, most, at the time, and maybe looking back, it's like, boy, that should have been so obvious just because you've gained experience, or the most daunting challenge that for you, it seems like you're being a high risk guy in terms of adventure, fear doesn't plague you nearly as much as maybe other entrepreneurs or some of our listeners, certain things about fear. And we all have different risk tolerances, fear tolerances, but for you, when were you the most afraid? I guess let me ask you that.
So I have a story for that. I think I know that one off the cuff. Darkest, when I think darkest, I think, I have a lot of negative emotions that come up. And I think if I was choosing my darkest days, there are a number of things that have happened over the years within the business where that affected individuals, could be staff, could be partners, et cetera, where you go into something, and this I think happens to anybody who's ever had a business, anybody who's ever had a partner. It even happens in marital relationships, spouses, girlfriends, children, you name it. You go into something with the best of intentions. You put your best foot forward. You believe you're doing the right thing. You view yourself as ethical. You're walking the righteous path, whatever you want to call it. And through the course of one or a series of disagreements, the person that you're interacting with leaves scarred, upset, hurt, and believes that you were actually doing the opposite, right? They have a negative view of you. They think that you were, working against them or out to get them. And oftentimes it's a story where two guys go into business together, right? They're best friends in college or they're brothers. And then 2 yeyears later, they're suing each other and And, it's that thing where people get hurt. Coming back to the thing that gives me the most pressure and stress, people get hurt, people get negatively impacted. It's never your intention, but it does happen. That kills me. And I think most of my darkest moments from a sadness or a shame or regret or guilt, those types of dark emotions, comes in those moments when others are hurt, when it was not my intention.
When you think about those, because when you say that, and I'm sure for all of you as listeners, when he says that, we automatically all think about a scenario that we were in. We personalize that. And when I break it down, just listening to you here, there are certain areas where I look back and I'm like, boy, had I just done this, this, or this, and I wish I would have done things differently, and I learned from it. And other scenarios where no matter what I would have done, the outcome would have been the same.
Sure.
So when you look back, what things in the scenarios where you could control, and that if you had made a different choice, it would have had a different outcome. What have you learned from those that you can impart to us so that we can learn from what you learned, something like that? The challenging thing is
if you were in those situations, putting your best foot forward and doing all the things I talked about, right? If you look back and it's obvious to you what you could have done differently, then were you really putting your best foot forward? I don't know. Are you admitting some guilt there? I don't know. Obviously, hindsight is 20/20.
Well, and you get wiser as you get older and you experience more things. And, to your point, you were doing the best thing, what you knew was right or believed to be right at that time. And so looking back, it's easy to make a different decision. But there are certain scenarios where I'm like, that person was saying one thing and I didn't know people well enough to understand what they were actually saying was this, because I didn't have the emotional intelligence within me to recognize how to work with that person. And so I learned, and I'm sure you have as well, especially with as many employees and just in life, how to work with people. And different people require different actions or responses to ultimately get to the outcome you're trying to go to.
So I think, this keeps me up at night. I mull on this a lot. It haunts me. It really does. And I ask this question to myself over and over and over again. For me, there are a few situations where I look back, because you also got to say at that time, you may have only had certain decisions you could make, right?
100%.
There's only so many levers you can pull depending on the constraints and your situation. But for me, you just said the word saying, what would I be saying? And to me, it's communication. I don't know that in a lot of those situations I could have or would have done anything differently, but I could have communicated it differently. I could have been maybe more open and clear. I could have listened to understand, which is one of our core values now at Onsite, but I would have listened to understand, to really understand what they were trying to communicate, not what they were saying, but what they're trying to communicate. Yeah. Crystal clear expectations early on, full transparency, and I feel like I do those things pretty well, but I mean, just turning up the volume. And the other thing is, don't let your ego force you into trying to solve a problem that you can't solve, right?
That's a great point, Ben.
Yeah, going back to like relationships, right? Breakups. Most people that break up and split, they typically don't hate each other. It's when they break up, but then they kind of stay together in the gray area, right? And they keep sort of seeing each other, maybe dating, whatever they're doing, but they're not. There's no clear expectation of what's going on or what intentions are. That's where people get hurt.
Someone gets hurt.
And sometimes there are, I'm a big believer in like the obstacle is the way, right? Great book, Turning Towards the Dragon, facing your fears and whatnot, trying to solve hard problems. But when it comes to people, sometimes there are problems you can't solve. And sometimes it's in everybody's best interest to go their separate ways. And if you can call a spade, you can walk away amicably and you can walk away without hurting people. I think sometimes the win for me wasn't even the deal that I was trying to do. The win for me wasn't necessarily closing a sale or whatever. The win for me was getting you to agree that what I'm doing is in your best interest, right? Because I'm sitting here saying, I'm putting my best foot forward. I'm trying to do the right thing. Well, I need an affirmation now from you that you know that I'm doing that, so that I know that I'm doing that, right? So therefore, I need you to agree to this thing. And, that's not right. That becomes selfish. Now you're chasing ego. Now you're actually operating in your own best interest. And I think sometimes I let my ego get in the way where I could have just said, you know what? It's not the best thing for me. But whether you'll admit it or not, whatever we're trying to do is not the best thing for you, whether because of you or because of your family or your interests or beliefs. So here, let's go our separate ways. Let's have lunch once a month.
Yeah, when I reflect, the times where had I just said I was wrong or I made a mistake. That's not what you're talking about.
No, I am. That's the same thing. Same thing.
So my ego, why is it so hard for us as humans to admit that? And I think that's just part of being a sinful human, and you learn as you mature, and things get a lot easier when that is indeed the case. Now there's times when you got to stand up and you say, you know what, this is the right thing to do and move forward.
I think what drives me nuts is if you exit correctly, you'll have an opportunity to have the conversation where you can have a chance to say, I made a mistake. When you hurt somebody or it doesn't or you take it too far or you chase it too long, you'll never even get that opportunity. And that is the thing that will haunt you for eternity.
Well, no matter what it is.
It's lack of closure, right?
When you don't get closure. Exactly. Yeah. Now, so fear.
Darkest, most stressful moment. Most stressful moment.
So yeah, the greatest point of fear. And I don't go to these, you might have, these are negative connotations, but this is all about talking about the realistic side of entrepreneurism, and then we'll talk about, well, I guess what I could say the hopeful side. And okay, a lot of people are afraid to move forward and do something. Why shouldn't they be? So we'll get there in a moment.
Yeah, so this one's easy for me because we just went through it. We had a number of customers who at the end of last year, with the interest rate changes that were going on, stretched out contract terms. And this is like an age-old problem for business owners, right? Vendor doesn't want to pay an invoice on time. They want to renegotiate, whatever. The problem is when your customers are the biggest semiconductor companies in the world, you don't really have a stick that's big enough to motivate them. And if you try and hit them with a stick, then they'll just find someone else. As we were getting started, we wanted to fix every problem, right? And we wanted to make it easy for our customers. And so we were pre-funding a lot of things and financing a lot of things. And you ask me now why we're financing a multi-billion-dollar corporation, and I don't have a good answer for that other than I wanted to win, right? My ego was in control again. Bad decision. So anyways, we had a number of areas where we're pre-funding things for customers. On top of that, we're growing, and our biggest expenses are when we pre-fund the opening of new locations. So we were blowing up at the end of last year. We're opening up new locations, bigger locations. Before we would get locations where you had like one person that would phase in. Now we're opening locations that have 5, 6, 7, 8 people on day one. So the costs are getting bigger. And then on top of this, our customers say, okay, we're not going to pay you for the whole fourth quarter. And then at the end of the fourth quarter, they go, well, we're not going to pay you for the end of another quarter. And you start to see this happen with one customer, two customer, three customer, four customer. And all of a sudden, the end of the fourth quarter of last year, we were starting to get into a cash crunch.
Sure.
We had a customer.
Happens free. I've had it. Any entrepreneur that hasn't gone through a cash crunch, well, you're either a genius or I don't know what you're doing, but it's typical. It's happened.
It was crazy. And we came out of COVID with in a very strong cash position. I mean, I was like blown away. And we were running the lean business. We were operating profitably. We had built I think we built up 3/4 of operating expenses. Fantastic. That if we had no income, and we were running a conservative ship, I felt. So all through fourth quarter, we're not getting paid by one of our biggest customers. And then on January 1st, they pay us. And so that, we thought we were through the storm. But then they announced that they're not going to pay us for another quarter. So first quarter, and we weren't going to get a big check at the end of that quarter. We were going to get slow payments thereafter. Simultaneously, we had some other customers that did the same thing because of what was going on with interest rates primarily. And it was brutal. It was brutal. At that point, I knew we probably had enough cash to get through the end of that quarter after what we had just gone through in the fourth quarter. We also had just closed. We closed an acquisition in the first quarter of this year to buy a company called 10-4 Medical. I'm actually really excited about 10-4. 10-4 is the same thing that we do, but it's for first responders.
Okay.
So military personnel, firefighters, and policemen. It was a distress asset. We bought that. So we're closing on that. We're not getting paid by our vendors, and we're opening up a bunch of new locations. And I said, we might get to April before we have to solve this problem. And it got down. I mean, I'm at this point, I'm pulling money from anywhere I can. I'm trying to keep this thing going. And back in the day when our payroll was $30,000 every 2 weeks, whatever, right? I can ask a friend to help me out. Now your payroll's a few $100,000 every 2 weeks. Like no one's going to write that check.
Not as easy to fill the gap.
And I can't fill that gap, and so, and even if you're robbing Peter to pay Paul, like it's coming 2 weeks from now. So
the whole comes eventually.
Yeah. So we got down. I mean, at this point, it's getting to a level where our management team is talking about foregoing payroll. We're talking about furloughs. But the hard thing is if we take the staff off the site, then we're going to lose the contract. Yeah. So, and we have this great business, right? It's operating profitably. We're doing all the right things. We got great staff. We got the biggest customers in the world. Like, how could we be looking at a shutdown? So we get to April, and I remember that we got to the point where we basically ran a payroll, and we just said, okay, that's it. If we don't get these deposits in the next 7 days, that's it in some regard. Like, we're just going to have to stop operating. And it was kind of a dead end. I mean, that was it. We hadn't announced to the staff yet. We didn't have a good solution. Management was working on it. We were leaving every meeting every week, just really having trouble. And that was the first time, like when I talked earlier about the impact, right, being greater. this was the first time I really realized just how much effect it had on me. Like I had never hear entrepreneurs talk about like losing sleep and staying up at night. I never really experienced that because I love the risk. I love the crazy game. Now
you did there.
I did then, but this time now I'm having trouble sleeping at night. I'm waking up in the middle of the night yelling out, payroll or whatever it is when I sit up in bed. My wife freaking out. I mean, it was really brutal, and it wasn't short, right? A quarter is a long time, 90 days, and now I'm detaching in unhealthy ways, so to speak, and my whole life starts to just slip, and for me, unfortunately, I'm a momentum guy. So when one thing's going well, everything's going well. When one thing's going bad, it brings the whole ship down. And it's not a good way to live, but it's how I am.
I don't think that's just you, by the way.
Yeah, rising tide raises all ships, but exploding volcano burns everything,
exactly.
right? So anyways, here I am, the exploding volcano, and it was a scary time. And we actually had a gentleman come in from PNC Bank. This will be a big shtick for them because they completely saved our... PNC Bank had come into our EO forum and met with us a few months prior and said that thought they could get us a line of credit, which I thought was crazy because I didn't think we were big enough for that type of thing. And we were looking at factoring and some other business models. Reality was we didn't have time to putting those in place.
Factoring is where you have receivables. Let's say you have 100,000 receivables. You sell those receivables for 80%. Someone gives you 80%, and then they're hoping to make the difference for those of you who aren't familiar with what factoring is.
And your profit margin's 20%, so there it goes, right? And
exactly.
So PNC came through. We got approval. First of all, we started getting the payments in. Actually, PNC had come through with a line of credit for us, a great line of credit earlier in that first quarter, which allowed us to go as long as we did. Problem was we had now maxed out that line of credit. We hadn't even made a payment. We had maxed out that line of credit.
Interest only, which is pretty common for a working capital line of credit.
Yeah, absolutely. And so we get to the end of this week. We start getting payments in. We start getting some payments in. Call PNC and I say, hey, we're going to need some more credrit. And
Can you up that line of credit a little bit?
You haven't made any payments. And I'm like, well, yeah, it's okay. Who needs payments? So, luckily, the same reason we were in such a tight water is because we have huge customers that have a lot of power over us. Because of those customers and those brands, banks love the business model.
100%.
So they doubled it. They doubled the line of credit.
Fantastic.
So you know what? No questions asked. We'll open it. We'll double it tomorrow morning. And this was also an extremely challenging time for me because I stopped taking money out of the business. And so my income had gone to a very low level for, basically 2 quarters. And expenses are going up. My son's starting to go to school, life, right?
Yeah.
And so it was a crazy, crazy time. And it was less about me and what I was afraid of on my own. It was more about, how am I going to tell all these people that have some of our staff have relocated across the country. They've relocated their family and children. They've given up jobs that they loved. Just call them and be like, hey guys, we're done. And especially look, I get it. If there's a great financial crisis or a great recession or whatever, you go out of business, it is what it is.
Yeah.
You and everybody else, right? Yep. But if things are great and you're running an amazing operation you're proud of and everyone else is proud of, you got great customers and you just lose it. That was the dichotomy that I could not get my head around. It was I'm finally doing the right things and I'm going to lose everything.
It's the old adage, growing broke. And that is, I've been in a scenario with that in a previous business where it is the most frustrating thing because to your point, and you're talking about with much larger national customers, of course, than what I was looking at, but you're profitable. How can this be happening when I've done it? I've identified the market segment that's missing. I've capitalized on it. My company's growing. We're incredibly profitable. This has the opportunity to grow leaps and bounds. Cash is king. That's what it comes down to. Cash is king. And I've always said, I'm a CPA and I've always talked about Wall Street's, particularly public companies, love that income statement. They just love that. I said, I don't care about the income statement. Obviously, that's not true, but cash flow statement. Give me the cash flow statement because that's really what a company lives or dies by.
Yeah, my least favorite button on the internet is the button in QuickBooks where you switch from accrual-based accounting to cash-based accounting. I don't like to click that button. And so I totally understand it. But you know what? it's funny. One of my good buddies, Danny Fossey, and I, we joke about a lot of things, but we've always joked with each other in our darkest hours. We said, hey, only in the darkness can you begin to see the light, right? And
it's so true.
It's so true. And so as funny as it is, and in the situations that we were using it in specifically, but as funny as it is so true. And this forced us to change a lot of things, right? It forced us to go out and get a banking relationship. Like, we're big enough for that now. It forced us to view ourselves as big enough for that. It forced us to get rid of this financing the bigger fish model. Mm-hmm. It forced us to change how we set up new clinics, and with pre-funding and deposits and all the things like this. It changed how we do our invoicing. We went away from monthly invoicing all the way down to daily, real-time, or weekly invoicing to lower our receivable cycle. So even if customers were stretching terms, initial invoices wouldn't age as long.
And each of those changes that you just described have made you more sustainable, more scalable,
right,
more profitable ultimately, but you never would have experienced it had you not faced that cliff, really.
Yeah, because our old thing was, well, we're just going to keep our receivables low. But that doesn't work, because receivables high means you're growing, right?
Exactly.
So now we look at receivable cycle, we look at collection cycle, things like that, things that we probably should have known early on, but we're just focused on still providing a great service, but raising our financial IQ. And being, like you said, running the business on a cash flow statement. We want to be balance sheet wealthy, not income sheet wealthy. Yeah. And working with our customers and vendors. We realized too, we were so focused looking at our customers saying, why are you doing this to us? Pay us, why would you screw us? We're helping you out. We saved you millions of dollars. And we said, well, wait a second. If they're doing this to us,
exactly,
we could turn around over here and do it to them.
Exactly.
So we became a bit of the villain as well. We've not villain, but just
you got to find the balance.
Find the balance. So we're working with our vendors and whatnot to give us terms.
Yep.
So if we get stretched, we can stretch them, and so on and so forth. And paid when paid cash contracts we have with our customers. So we want paid when paid with people that we owe money to. So just trying to, like we were talking about earlier, those upstream and downstream efficiencies, strategic alignment. But yeah, today we're in probably one of the strongest cash positions we've ever been in. From a operational standpoint, with the line of credit we have, I feel invincible, better prepared to weather any storm than we would have before. And, going back to Danny's quote, only in the darkness can you begin to see the light. And now the light is shining down.
Yeah, so that's fantastic. And I appreciate you sharing that with us, because there are so many lessons that every entrepreneur can learn from that and will experience. I think all entrepreneurs, I can hear something and it automatically resonates with me if I've experienced it. I can also hear something and I hear what you're saying, but until I've experienced it, I can't internalize it as much. So now talking about, and you've been very gracious with your time, so I won't take too much more of your time. There are a lot of people who are either trapped in a corporate job or they are stuck in neutral in life. And I talk about 4 different types of individuals on this podcast all the time about, I believe you're born to be an entrepreneur, and you're either born to be it and you try it and you find that out. You're born to be it, you never try it. And those are the ones I want to focus on. That's the saddest to me. You're not born to be an entrepreneur. A lot of people disagree with this theory or concept that I have. You're not born to be an entrepreneur. You know that. You love working for someone else, and that fulfills everything you want. And you're not born to be an entrepreneur, and you try it and you realize this isn't for me. So to help all of those who are in that category of, again, how I classify it as born to be an entrepreneur, but they haven't taken the chance or the risk to realize that they are indeed an entrepreneur because of fear. What are the top 2 or 3 things you would tell them to get past that fear, or help alleviate it to some extent? And nothing anybody can say can actually force you to take any action. But what words of wisdom would you give them to at least move that needle forward and get them out of neutral to take a risk on themselves, regardless of the life stage that you're in? And obviously, I always talk about, when you're younger, go for a 10-bagger. Just go for a grand slam.
Sure.
Because you have nothing to lose.
Totally.
As you get older and you get a family and you've got people that you're responsible for, employees, and when you get larger, it's a lot more challenging, as you've described for us. So, setting aside life cycle stage, what would you tell those people?
So I would say 2 things, I think. The first one is, going back to what we talked about earlier about entrepreneurs being calculated risk takers, right? Informed risk takers. You got to have some humility, and you should be able to look at your life and do a self-evaluation to determine if you contain the characteristics that would potentially equate or align with an entrepreneur. Forget success, but just an entrepreneur's lifestyle. For me, when I do the exercise to find my why, right, or to discover my hows, it's about storytelling. A great coach who taught me that if you want to find if somebody shares your core values or shares your beliefs, have them tell you stories about those things, right? I can tell, for me, I think the big thing that allows me to move forward in entrepreneurship and when I'm facing great challenges is this grit, right? Knowing that if you tell me to walk through the desert, I may not be able to walk faster than you, but I'm pretty sure I can walk farther, right? I can keep going. I'm the diesel motor. And to me, that's grit. And so I can tell you 100 stories in my life that exemplify grit. I do think grit is one of the premier characteristics of a successful entrepreneur or anybody who's taking on a hard endeavor, whatever that may be, entrepreneurship being a worthy one. So if you can tell stories about yourself, regardless of how old you are, showing examples of grit and perseverance and whatnot, could be on the football field, it could be in your dad's garage, it could be running a marathon, or it could be former tales of entrepreneurship when you didn't even realize they were entrepreneurship. You should be able to tell stories about those characteristics that you think are most equate to being an entrepreneur. If you have those stories, if they come easy to you, and you've been doing it in some form or another your whole life, I would say go for it, right? It's no longer a big risk. It's a calculated risk, and there's a good chance that you're going to do just fine. If you take that step, I think the next thing that I would throw out there is it's one foot in front of the other. We have canals here in Arizona. There's telephone poles along the canal. So every time you run a marathon on the canal, they say you run it telephone pole by telephone pole. You don't stand at the start line thinking about, I got to go 26 miles at a 6-minute marathon. You say, I can probably run a 6-minute marathon to that next telephone pole. And then you run to the next one. And then you run to the next one. And then you start to say, oh, I can definitely run to that next telephone pole. I've done it 50 times. And as you get over the halfway point, as you get over the 3/4 point, you say, wow, now I've only got 14 telephone poles to go. I've already done 180. I know I can get to the finish line, right? And this confidence builds. And I think entrepreneurship builds that same way. It's like a snowball rolling down the hill. It's never easy. The task of running fast, the task of riding your bike fast, the task of whatever it is, whatever the endeavor is, it's never easy. But each time you do it in an increment, it's just as hard in the next increment, but you have a little bit more confidence in that effort. And so I think it's one foot in front of the other. Don't think about the race, think about the next step and take it and let that confidence build, and you'll find yourself taking bigger and more frequent steps as that confidence in yourself builds. And to some extent, that's grit developing over time through action. Mm-hmm. But to me, that's what it's all about. So a true self-evaluation, I know what I'm not good at. There are many things I'm not good at, which I never signed myself up to do. So go into it with some humility and honesty. And then if you believe you're the person, just go for it, just go for it, because if you probably are.
I love that advice. Do you believe, and a lot of people, especially in our society and today, it's about materiality and, ooh, you're an entrepreneur, you must be rich, or everything you've experienced. You've talked about your why to a certain extent. A lot of people's why, I believe mistakenly so, and so I talk a lot about this, is I want to be a business owner to be wealthy, to make money. Obviously, you have to make money to have a sustainable business model. But there's this fantasaical idea that money makes you happy. And that's why everybody wants to be an entrepreneur. I think that's changing into society, especially as we go to Gen Z or some of the newer generations, and they have more of a purpose versus focusing on the bottom line. And I think there's huge advantages to that. I also think there are a few disadvantages to that as well. But in your experience, does money make you happy?
I think it's, I think experiences make you happy, right? I think the types of experience that make different people happy are varied. I think I have genuinely met a couple people that really are made happy by money. I don't necessarily like being around them, but I think I've met a few people who really, they're passionate about it. The same way I'm passionate about building something or craftsmanship or endurance racing. I've met people who I genuinely think are as passionate about money. I think it's a very, 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 very small percentage of the population. And if you believe you're one of them, I would ask you to dig a little deeper and be really sure before you go down that path. I think money can help us create experiences for ourselves and our family. And I think experiences are ultimately what make us happy when they resonate with us and they give us fulfillment. Experiences in their very nature are finite, right? You do something and then you need another experience.
Exactly.
A life where you cease to have experiences is a life that you're not really living, right? It's the nature of what we do. So I do think money can help you have more of those, but it is not the only gateway to them. And ultimately, you have to be passionate about what you're doing. You really do. I know it's so cliche, but you have to have a purpose, and what you're doing has to align with it. And if your purpose or passion, either in the rare instance is money or requires money, then it's something that you have to be cognizant of, and it's something that you have to chase so that you can have those experiences. If your experiences don't require money, then it's not even an important part of your life other than just paying your bills and providing you the quality of life that you need.
Yeah. A million more questions I could ask you. I'm not going to ask you in terms of funding and everything. It sounds like you've had a unique set of experiences, or I should say an ample set of experiences with varying types of individuals as business partners. If someone came to you and said, Ben, I want to go into this business. I think I should have a business partner, and I think I know who that should be, but I'm really afraid of having a business partner. Can you tell me whether I should have a business partner or not? What would you say to someone that asked you for advice on business partners? And you've touched on it, but I want to give you an opportunity to focus exclusively on that concept based on your experiences.
Well, the reality is, if you want to, it depends on the size of your business, right? If you want to, going back to what I was talking about earlier about being a well-paid salesperson or a well-paid producer, if you want to be a one-man or one-woman shop in the mortgage business, insurance business, recruiting business, whatever, you can do that, and you can make a great clip. If you want to scale an enterprise, let's set the word business partner aside. People, right? There's going to be other people there. Mm-hmm. They could be your partners. They could be your senior managers, direct reports. They could be your subordinates, staff, team, whatever you want to call it. But there's going to be people. The challenge of navigating quality relationships, trusting relationships with other people is in some ways the same, regardless of their authority level relevant to you. So if you want to scale a business, you better get used to having partners, right? Whatever you want to call them. I think whether or not you need a partner has a true equity partner has a lot to do with your financial situation, the funding requirements of your business, the nature of what you're doing, the associated liabilities, licensure requirements, legal requirements. There may be some situations where you just need a partner, right? If you're going to
in your case, the doctor, like you couldn't have done what you wanted to do because you're not a doctor.
Right. I have to have a business partner, right? There could be situations where you want to grow biotech and you're going to have to do 15 years of research. Well, you need cash. So, unless you're a billionaire, you're going to have a partner.
Yep.
So I think it's foolish of us to set off on an endeavor that requires people and say, I'm going to do it alone. And whether or not you have an equity partner is up to you, but you need to master the skills of choosing people that you align with, that share, at least in part or in whole, your whys, your hows. They resonate with you and yours resonate with them. And therefore you have a mutual admiration or respect. And, people always say, oh, the number one thing is trust. Look, trust is not a trait that you just give to someone, right? Yeah. It's developed over time through action. So you have to have people that you enjoy working with enough to allow enough time working together for the trust and all that stuff to develop. And I think that's about being intentional with how you go about choosing the people you work with, whatever their role may be, how you go about expressing to them who you are so that they can also make an informed decision as to whether or not working with you is a good idea. And, and then staying true to yourself and to that assessment over the course of your relationship.
Yeah, that's a great perspective. And I ask that question to a lot of people. And I think you've added a lot of things that or put them in a different way than we've heard before. So thank you. Is there anything else that we haven't talked about that you have found particularly helpful through your entrepreneurial journey, whatever it may be, or that you would like to give to our listeners as words of advice, whether they're aspiring entrepreneurs, they've been in business for a long time? I'm a big believer that no matter where someone is on their journey, personally and professionally, I don't care if you're a billionaire, you can always learn from someone who is just starting off and vice versa. So is there anything else you would like to share that you found particularly helpful or you think would be helpful for our listeners?
I think I don't necessarily have some huge pot of wisdom to give. I think we're in a cool time right now in the world where both in the podcast world and whatnot, this concept of self-awareness, self-exploration, and self-discovery and self-help is no longer like apropos or something that people are afraid of. It's people are actually diving into it. I've read enough business books at this point, self-help books and otherwise, that I should be a billionaire, right? Or the number of books I read. It doesn't work that way, unfortunately. But in business, it's always been normal to have all these books, how to write guides and whatnot, and it's admirable to read these things. I think it's important to do put the same level of intention and effort behind developing yourself. You said emotional IQ earlier, your self-awareness, your emotional IQ, and all of this as a person, discovering your why, figuring out what your authentic passions are, so you can make informed decisions with people and with work. So as an entrepreneur, it's easy to get lost in the business, right? It's easy to read nothing but books on organization and how to run a to-do list. Don't forget about continuing to develop yourself and discovering yourself and mastering yourself, because ultimately, for me, the correlation between that exploration and process seems to be directly correlated to the growth and success of the business. And some of that is just the nature of time.
Yeah.
But I see the speed of our progress at work accelerating as I have become what I think is a more self-aware, informed, humble person. And I don't know that I'm maybe saying I'm more self-aware is egotistical, but I'm putting more time and effort into the process of becoming more self-aware. And I find myself connecting more with the people that we work with, customers, vendors, staff, and otherwise. And I see them responding in such a unique, positive way. I feel that they're inspired to action, which is rewarding to me and pushes me forward. And so I would just encourage people to focus as much as they can, hopefully maybe even as much as they focus on the business, on themselves, and don't get lost. Don't get lost in the process.
Yeah, and I think that's so, I've always been a big believer that people think businesses fail because of the balance sheet or the income statement, the cash flow. That's just a symptom. People fail because of people. And I believe it's a large degree of what you just described. People don't spend enough time on them developing themselves, understanding how they should react in certain situations or how to handle certain situations. And it's up here. So much of it in this day and age is up here.
Well, and I can give you, I've got proof of that based on what happened to me in the first quarter. We had no more income statement, no more cash, and no more balance sheet, and we made it. So,
yeah,
so it's definitely not about those things. But no, I totally agree.
Ben, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate you coming on.
Yeah, this was great. Appreciate it, man. Really enjoyed it.
What an incredible conversation with Ben. As I said, when I was with Ben, he has this natural entrepreneurial knack, and he's very authentic and he's very well articulated on some of the lessons that he's learned and that I think most entrepreneurs will learn as they go down that path. And quite frankly, even if it's not in business, a lot of the concepts that he talked about are just a part of living and learning life. So we're incredibly thankful for Ben for joining us this week. That's all the time we have for this week's episode of the Andrew Holland Podcast. Please be sure to follow us on Twitter and Threads. My handle is A Holland Podcast. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and like every episode. My YouTube channel is the Andrew Holland Podcast. If you subscribe to that, you'll get the weekly updates when we post the video version of the podcast. And lastly, subscribe to the podcast on your favorite podcast outlet, whether it's Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube Podcasts. Please, this podcast is only as good as we collectively make it. So if you have insights or you have thoughts or comments on today's episode or any of the episodes that you may have listened to, please reach out to me on Twitter. Like I said, A Holland Podcast. I welcome and love all feedback. If you want to be a guest on this podcast, reach out to me, Andrew at andrewsholland.com, or you can go to our website, theandrewhollandpodcast.com, and submit the contact form. Thank you so much for joining us this week. Have a great rest of your week, and we'll talk again next Wednesday. Thank you for listening to the Andrew Holland Podcast. Be sure to visit our website, theandrewhollandpodcast.com, for additional content on business, entrepreneurship, and everything in between. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, The Andrew Holland Podcast, to get notifications when new podcasts have been released. And lastly, follow us on Twitter, A Holland Podcast. That's A Holland Podcast, for all the conversations we're having outside the podcast. Thanks again so much for joining us this week. Have a great day, and we'll talk again next week.